Tonight we're going to cover a number of interesting subjects, not the least of which is this whole business of the president who loves to salute. He salutes here, he salutes there, he salutes the helicopter, he salutes the people in the helicopter, etc., etc. We'll talk about that and how this all got started and how wrong it all is. And then we're going to look at the Scooter Libby trial. This was the grand defense that was going to be presented, that was going to explain how Scooter, little Scooter, who writes the filthy sex novels quite successfully, by the way, little Scooter had a great defense, and Cheney was going to come in and they were going to straighten it all out, that this wasn't a leak from Scooter, this was well known, that this had been disclosed before and on, and well, it's all collapsed. The whole defense has collapsed, it's all over. There is no Scooter Libby defense. But here's what they've ended up with. But I have to give the lawyers some credit. Here's what they've ended up with. Since they have no defense, and of course Cheney can't face cross-examination really on about any subject you can imagine, but he certainly can't face cross-examination on this. Little Scooter won't take the stand. You know, the Republicans, those that safeguard the integrity of the nation, the high moral standards of the country, the commitment to truth and honor and families and family values. No, he's not going to take the stand because, you know, obviously he can't face cross-examination and he would not be able to answer the hard questions. But now here's what the lawyers have ended up with. Cheney's out. He won't testify. Little Scooter's not going to testify, and I can't get any witnesses that are really going to advance this theory that really it wasn't Scooter at all. Well, what the truth is, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, is that they organized this entire charade. Cheney was behind it all, and they did it to blast Wilson, to embarrass him and to embarrass his wife and to get back at him because he was publishing the truth and saying the truth, and they didn't like it, because it interfered with their grand plans in Iraq. But here's what they've ended up with. This is the new Scooter Libby defense. I love it. Here's the Scooter Libby defense. Scooter is so incompetent and so stupid and so unprepared, really, for the position that he held at the time, advising the vice president, or as the executive assistant to the vice president, or whatever his official title was, that he was so incompetent, so foolish, and so stupid, he can't remember anything. But that was always Scooter's problem. Scooter couldn't remember anything. Scooter just had a bad memory. He was just kind of a ding-dong, okay? That's who Cheney picked, okay, as his chief of staff. That's who Cheney picked, a ding-dong, a guy who couldn't remember anything, a guy who got stuff confused all the time, a guy who would just wandered around, bumping into stuff. That's the vice president's selection for his chief of staff. Now, isn't that a great defense? It's creative. It's creative. But isn't that a marvelous defense? He was too stupid for the job. Now, here's the commander-in-chief story. This is from Gary Wills from the New York Times. This is not really original to him, but he really wrote this in a marvelous way, dated January 27, 2007. I'm just going to read portions of it. We hear constantly now about our commander-in-chief. The word has become a synonym for president. It is said that we elect a commander-in-chief. It is asked whether this or that candidate is worthy to be our commander-in-chief. But here's the news. The president is not our commander-in-chief, never has been our commander-in-chief, never will be our commander-in-chief. He certainly is not mine, because I'm not in the Army, says Mr. Wills, nor are most of you. He says, I first cringed at the misuse in 1973 during the Saturday Night Massacre, as it was called. President Richard Nixon, angered at the Watergate inquiry being conducted by the special prosecutor Archibald Cox, dispatched his chief of staff, Al Haig, to arrange for Mr. Cox firing. Mr. Haig told the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, to dismiss Mr. Cox. Mr. Richardson refused and resigned. Then Mr. Haig told the second in line of the Justice Department, William Ruckelshaus, to fire Mr. Cox. Mr. Ruckelshaus refused and accepted his dismissal. The third in line, Robert Bork, finally did the deed. You all remember old Bobby Bork. All right, what struck me was that Mr. Haig told Mr. Ruckelshaus, you know what it means when an order comes down from the commander-in-chief and a member of his team cannot execute it. This was as great a constitutional faux pas as Mr. Haig's later claim when President Reagan was wounded that Constitutionally, I'm in control. Wasn't that a terrifying moment when Al Haig said, don't worry, I'm here. If anything bad happens, immediately he's like, what? Al Haig? Okay. The average citizen will tell you, he's our commander-in-chief. No, he's not. He's the commander-in-chief of the Army and of the Navy of the United States, and nothing more. And all of this saluting by, and I don't mean to be grossly disrespectful here, but how can you say he's anything other than a draft dodger? I mean, he is a draft dodger. He hid out in the National Guard. And none of these big hawks ever served in the military. That whole list of them, Wolfowitz and Cheney and all of them, and Ashcroft, no, none of them served in the military. So what we have is a conduct that's unbecoming the President of the United States. And as I pointed out here before, it creates this military dictatorship ambiance around the President, that because we're in a war, he gets to make all the decisions, he gets to suspend civil liberties, and this Republican Congress has been, quick to do anything that he wants. On that note, the House is debating right now, registering a dissenting opinion about the Iraq War. And Republicans are joining Democrats, and the Republicans that are joining are in districts where many men and women have died. And they are hearing from the families in areas where you have Army bases especially, or Marine bases, or Marine centers. You are finding more and more people who are changing their mind in the Congress that are Republicans. So Bush is left with a handful of diehard supporters in areas primarily where there are few casualties. That's the truth, okay? It's easy to be for the war. It was like the guy who called here a few weeks ago. And he made this comment that we like the president, and I went to the Military Times and showed you that at best it's 50-50, and more than 50% of the military does not agree with the way Bush is the commander-in-chief of the Army and of the Navy. But he went on to say, how he supported the war, and then he made some comments about, well, what do you liberals think is worth fighting for and everything? And he was taking classes at the University of West Florida. I mean, he wasn't racing over to serve. So the debate continues, where are we going to go with this? It's financially, it's devastating to the country. It's devastating to the families in the country. More and more people are saying there is no way out of this. This is a Bush disaster from the get-go, ill-conceived, poorly planned, poorly executed, poorly equipped, no plan for restructuring the country or building the country back, no post-invasion plans. The incompetence of Rumsfeld is evident by anybody's account. And we are not seeing many people who are standing up and saying Bush was right. And I credit Republicans for that. I mean, they're saying, hey, this is a huge disaster. They did a lot better in the White House when they had the reporter named Gannon. Don't you remember Gannon? He was the homosexual male prostitute that got a high security clearance to be in the White House to handle briefings and press conferences, and he would ask all the friendly questions of the president. Mr. President, you've spent so much of your life caring for others, things like that. And everybody would look around and say, where'd this guy come from? So finally, the president's people don't really do a lot of research on things like that, because Mr. Gannon said he really wanted to be a friendly reporter. And they said, well, gosh, we need friendly reporters because we've got all these other reporters from the liberal media. I mean, they're intelligent, they're educated, they're well-read. We don't want them asking questions. We need somebody like Officer Gannon. I'm not Officer Gannon. I just promoted him. Mr. Gannon, the reporter. So they had Mr. Gannon in there, okay, the male prostitute.